Tomoe Gozen. Tomoe Gozen enters history the way a storm enters a valley, suddenly, completely, and without apology. The Heike Monogatari, the great literary chronicle of the Ginpei War, describes her as a warrior worth 1,000, a woman with long black hair, and a face described as beautiful even by the standards of a text obsessed with beauty, who could ride horses down the steepest slopes without flinching, draw a bow powerful enough to drop any opponent, and handle a sword with the kind of precision that made professional warriors nervous. She served under Minamoto no Yoshinaka, the cousin of Yoritomo who had swept through northern Japan with terrifying speed, and she was at his side for the Battle of Iwazu in February 1184, one of the final and most desperate engagements of the Genpei War. By then, Yoshinaka's position had collapsed entirely. His own cousin Yoritomo had turned against him and sent forces under Minamoto no Yoshitsune and Noriyori to eliminate him. At Iwazu, in what is now Shiga Prefecture, on a winter battlefield where the ground was frozen hard and the sky heavy with gray cloud, Yoshinaka's army disintegrated around him. What happened to Tomoe Gozen next is the central historical mystery of her life. The dominant account in the Heike Monogatari says Yoshinaka ordered her to flee before his final stand, telling her it would be shameful for him to pass alongside a woman. She obeyed and vanished from the record. A separate tradition holds that she became a Buddhist nun and lived to an age somewhere past 90, spending decades in prayer for Yoshinaka's soul. A third account simply places her passing at Iwazu alongside him. Historians are genuinely divided on whether Tomoe Gozen was entirely historical or whether elements of her story were shaped by the literary needs of the Heike's authors, who were working decades after the events they described. What is not disputed is the cultural weight she carries. A woman described with the vocabulary reserved for the greatest warriors of her era, whose end was either exile into a life of mourning, or a battlefield passing in winter, or something no record survived to capture. Minamoto no Yoshitsune. Minamoto no Yoshitsune is arguably the most beloved tragic figure in all of Japanese history, which is a remarkable thing to be in a history full of tragic figures. He was the military genius behind the Minamoto clan's final destruction of the Taira, winning a series of naval and land engagements that culminated in the Battle of Dan no Ura in April 1185, where the Taira were effectively annihilated and the child Emperor Entoku passed away in the arms of his grandmother rather than be captured. Yoshitsune's tactics were innovative, daring, and occasionally seemed to border on the impossible. He reportedly led cavalry down cliffs at Ichinotani that the Taira had left unguarded because no rational commander would attempt the descent. His reward for all of this was his brother Yoritomo's growing suspicion, then open hostility. Yoritomo was building a system of government, not a family dynasty, and a wildly popular younger brother with independent military command was a structural threat regardless of loyalty. Yoshitsune spent his final years as a fugitive, sheltered by the northern Lord Fujiwara no Hidehira. But when Hidehira passed away, his son Yasuhira folded under Yoritomo's pressure and turned against his guest. On June 15, 1189, Yoshitsune was cornered at Koromogawa no Tachi in the far north of Honshu, with nowhere left to run. He took the lives of his wife and young son himself to prevent their capture, then took his own life, one of the earliest well-documented instances of the practice in samurai history. He was approximately 30 years old. The gap between what he achieved and how he passed, hunted, betrayed, alone in a northern fortress, while his brother consolidated power from Kamakura, lodged itself permanently in the Japanese cultural imagination. There's even a persistent legend, entirely without historical credibility, but impossible to fully extinguish, that Yoshitsune did not pass at Koromogawa at all, but fled to the continent and eventually became Genghis Khan. That a story so impossible found such lasting life tells you everything about how unwilling Japanese culture was to accept the ending history actually gave him. Minamoto no Yoritomo. Minamoto no Yoritomo built the first shogunate, restructured Japanese governance around warrior administration, and effectively invented the political framework that would define Japan for the next 7 centuries. He survived betrayal, exile, the near total annihilation of his clan, and the constant dangerous politics of a country tearing itself apart. He then passed away in early 1199 under circumstances that historians still cannot fully resolve, following a fall from his horse at a bridge dedication ceremony. The official account describes him attending the opening of a new bridge over the Sagami River, falling from his mount, and never regaining meaningful consciousness, passing of the resulting illness within weeks at age 51 or 52. What makes this passing remarkable is the story that attached itself to it almost immediately. That Yoritomo, riding to the ceremony, saw the spirit of his brother Yoshitsune rising from the water and was so terrified that he lost control of his horse. In the years since Yoshitsune's passing, Yoritomo had also orchestrated the ends of several other relatives he considered threats, and the spirit story functions as a kind of cultural accounting. The idea that a man responsible for so many deaths could not simply pass of an unremarkable illness without the departed coming to collect. Modern historians are skeptical of the apparition and more inclined toward illness, possibly worsened by the fall, possibly coincidental with it. What is not debated is the political consequence. Within a generation, the shogunate Yoritomo built was dominated not by his heirs, but by the Hojo clan of regents. His sons were gone, and his direct line had ended. He built an institution that outlasted him by well over a century, and a bloodline that did not outlast him by 20 years. Kusunoki Masashige. Kusunoki Masashige knew he was going to fall at Minatagawa before he ever left for the battle. He told Emperor Go-Daigo directly that marching out to meet Ashikaga Takauji's forces in the open field was a strategic mistake. The correct move was to fall back, defend Kyoto from a position of strength, and wait for political fractures in the Ashikaga coalition to create opportunities. The emperor overruled him. According to the Taiheki, the great chronicle of the Nanbokucho Wars, Masashige accepted the order, rode home to say goodbye to his son Masatsura, and asked the boy a question that has echoed through Japanese culture ever since. How many times would he wish to be reborn to serve the emperor? Masatsura answered 7 times. Masashige agreed and left. At the Battle of Minatagawa on July 4th, 1336, in the summer heat of what is now the Kobe area, his outnumbered forces were surrounded and destroyed. He and his brother Masasu retreated to a farmhouse with only a handful of men remaining, counted their wounds. Masashige had reportedly taken 11, and chose to end their lives honorably together, Masasu asking the same question about rebirth as a final exchange between brothers. He was approximately 41 to 43 years old. The loss was total. Go-Daigo's cause collapsed shortly after, and Ashikaga Takauji established the Muromachi shogunate. But the image of a man who knew exactly what was coming, argued against it rationally, accepted the order anyway, and faced the end without bitterness, transformed Masashige into something beyond a historical figure. In 1872, the Meiji government built Minatagawa Shrine on the site of his passing, and enshrined him there, making him officially one of Japan's greatest loyalists, a status built entirely on the willingness to fall for a cause he had already calculated was lost. Wasugi Kenshin. Wasugi Kenshin, the Dragon of Echigo, spent most of his adult life fighting Takeda Shingen in a series of 5 inconclusive battles at Kawanakajima that neither man ever decisively won, sending salt to that same rival when the Hojo clan tried to strangle him by cutting off supply routes because Kenshin found the idea of winning through starvation beneath him, and building a reputation for personal honor so extreme it sometimes functioned more like theater than strategy. He passed away on April 19th, 1578, the night before he was supposed to march his army south against Oda Nobunaga, a campaign that military historians have speculated might have dramatically altered the course of Japanese unification, given that Nobunaga had no good answer to Kenshin's cavalry at the time. The cause of passing was almost certainly a stroke or esophageal cancer. He collapsed outside a latrine at Kasugiyama Castle and never recovered, passing 4 days later at age 48 or 49. There is a persistent tradition that a ninja concealed in the sace pit beneath the latrine struck upward with a spear, and while this story appears in various popular accounts, it is almost certainly legend. The medical symptoms described in contemporary sources align with stroke or advanced cancer far more convincingly than with a spear wound. What is historically verified is the consequence. Kenshin passed without naming an heir, immediately triggering the Otat no reign, a vicious succession conflict between his 2 adopted sons that destroyed Wasugi military power from within and handed Nobunaga's coalition the breathing room it needed to consolidate the north. The Dragon of Echigo, who never lost his nerve on a battlefield, was brought down by his own body in the dark, alone, before he could fight the most important battle of his life. Takeda Shingen. Takeda Shingen, the Tiger of Kai, came closer to stopping Oda Nobunaga than almost anyone else in the Sengoku period, and he did it after already proving at the Battle of Mikitagahara in December 1572 that Tokugawa Ieyasu's forces were no obstacle at all. Ieyasu fled that battle so thoroughly that a famous story, possibly apocryphal, claims he soiled himself in the retreat. By the spring of 1573, Shingen was marching toward Kyoto with a massive army, and Nobunaga had very few good options remaining. Then Shingen passed away at Noda Castle in April 1573, besieging it at age 51 or 52, and the campaign dissolved. The official cause is contested. Most sources point to tuberculosis or a similar pulmonary illness that had been progressing for some time, while a competing tradition holds that a skilled marksman named Tsurimi Tsukimon, firing from within the besieged castle walls, struck him in the head or throat while Shingen sat listening to flute music drifting from inside the fortifications at night, the implication being that whoever was playing knew exactly what they were doing. Modern historians lean toward illness as the primary cause, with any wound being a secondary or coincidental factor. But the marksman's story has survived precisely because it is a better story. What followed his passing was extraordinary in its own right. His generals kept the passing secret for what some sources claim was up to 2 years, continuing military operations under the pretense that Shingen was still in command, managing correspondence and deployments in his name while his body was presumably already buried. His son Takeda Katsuyori inherited the clan, and was destroyed by Nobunaga at the Battle of Nagashino just 2 years later in 1575, the famous battle where massed firearms, firing and rotating volleys shattered the Takeda cavalry that had been one of Shingen's greatest weapons. Oda Nobunaga. Oda Nobunaga changed Japanese warfare, Japanese politics, and Japanese religious life, and was then brought down in one night by a single subordinate he had apparently underestimated. On June 21st, 1582, Nobunaga was staying at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto with a personal guard of perhaps 30 to 50 men, a small retinue appropriate for a man stopping en route to a military campaign, rather than a man expecting to fight. His general Akechi Mitsuhide arrived outside the temple with approximately 13,000 soldiers, surrounded it, and sent them in. Nobunaga reportedly fought personally for a time, first with a spear, then with a bow until an injury made that impossible, then retreated into the inner chambers as the temple began to burn around him. No remains were ever recovered. Contemporary accounts and later chronicles agree that he either took his own life in the burning interior or was consumed by the fire itself, but since the temple burned completely and no remains were identified, his passing exists as a historical fact without a physical confirmation. Just a building that was there in the evening and wasn't in the morning, and a man who controlled roughly a third of Japan who was simply gone. The motive behind Akechi Mitsuhide's decision to bring down the man he had served for years is one of Japanese history's genuine mysteries. Theories range from a personal humiliation Nobunaga inflicted on him publicly to calculated political ambition to pressure from religious institutions Nobunaga had brutalized. Mitsuhide's time as the effective ruler of Japan lasted exactly 13 days before Toyotomi Hideyoshi, moving with extraordinary speed from a campaign in western Japan, defeated and eliminated him at the Battle of Yamazaki. 13 days of power in exchange for one night at Honnoji. Whatever his reasons were, Mitsuhide paid for them immediately. Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Toyotomi Hideyoshi began his life as the son of a peasant foot soldier and ended it as the ruler of a unified Japan, which is the kind of social trajectory that most societies in human history made structurally impossible. He passed away in September 1598, in bed at Fushimi Castle of illness, most likely a combination of senility and physical deterioration, his body and mind both eroding in ways that had been visible to those around him for the last several years of his life. His final years were marked by decisions that are difficult to explain outside of serious cognitive decline. The removal in 1591 of the tea master, Sen no Rikyu, one of the most culturally significant figures of the era, for reasons that were never made fully clear. The first Korean invasion in 1592 and the second in 1597, both catastrophic failures that drained Japanese resources and manpower without achieving anything, and an increasing paranoia about the security of his infant son Hideyori's inheritance. Before passing away, according to contemporary accounts, he wept in front of the assembled council of 5 regions, the group he had appointed to protect Hideyori, and begged them, among them Tokugawa Ieyasu, to ensure his son survived. Ieyasu nodded along, and within 17 years had destroyed Hideyori at the siege of Osaka in 1615, ending the Toyotomi bloodline entirely. Hideyoshi's passing was kept secret for several weeks, while the council was stabilized and prepared. A poem attributed to him on his deathbed reads, "According to tradition, my life came like dew, disappears like dew. All of Naniwa is dream after dream," though the poem's authenticity is not fully established. He was approximately 61 or 62 years old. The man who climbed higher than almost anyone in Japanese history passed away. Frightened, weeping, and asking powerful men he had no reason to fully trust to protect the one thing he could not protect himself. Tokugawa Ieyasu. Tokugawa Ieyasu survived more near-fatal experiences than almost any figure in Sengoku history, and then passed away at age 73, of what traditional accounts attribute to eating too much sea bream, fried in rapeseed oil at a banquet in early 1616, which is either the most anticlimactic ending in samurai history, or a perfect illustration of the fact that even the most dangerous men are eventually undone by something ordinary. The fried fish story is widely repeated in Japanese historical tradition, but medically unconvincing. Modern historians lean towards stomach cancer or a similar abdominal illness, with the fish meal possibly triggering or worsening a condition that was already developing. The contrast between this ending and everything that preceded it is almost difficult to process. Ieyasu had fled the Battle of Mikitagahara in 1572, with Shingen's forces in pursuit, somehow survived the political chaos following Nobunaga's passing in 1582, built his power carefully and quietly through the 1590s while Hideyoshi was alive, then won everything at Sekigahara in October 1600 in a single day that settled the question of who would rule Japan for the next 2.5 centuries. He passed away 8 months after the siege of Osaka in 1615, where the last serious challenge to Tokugawa supremacy was eliminated and Hideyori brought down. He had made sure there was nothing unresolved. His passing was equally meticulous. His instructions for burial and posthumous veneration were detailed and prearranged, and he was enshrined at Nikko as Tosho Daigongen, a divine protector of Japan, the elaborate golden lacquer architecture of the Toshogu Shrine rising from the mountain forests of Tochigi Prefecture as a monument to a man who treated even becoming a god as something to be organized in advance. Honda Tadakatsu. Honda Tadakatsu fought in over 57 battles alongside Tokugawa Ieyasu. The exact number varies by source, but 57 is the figure most commonly cited in Japanese historical tradition, and according to those same sources never received a significant wound in any of them, earning the nickname the warrior who surpassed death, and a reputation so extreme that even Oda Nobunaga reportedly praised him as one of Japan's finest warriors, which was not a compliment Nobunaga distributed carelessly. His weapon was a legendary spear called Tanbukiri, the dragonfly cutter, named according to tradition because a dragonfly that landed on its blade was divided in half by its own weight, listed alongside Fujimusume and Audijin as one of Japan's 3 great spears. He was one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Tokugawa, alongside Inaomasa, Sakakibara Yasumasa, and Sasai Tadatsugu, and he was always at the front of the fighting in every major engagement of the Sengoku period, from the early Mikawa campaigns through Sekigahara in 1600. He did not fall in battle. He passed away in December 1610, at approximately 62 or 63 years old, of illness, and one account, appearing in several traditional sources, though its reliability is uncertain, claims that his health noticeably declined after he accidentally cut himself while carving or examining a piece of his own woodwork in retirement. The idea that a man who walked through 57 battles without serious injury was finally drawn blood by his own hobby in a quiet room is either a cruel joke from history or simply the way probability works when you give it enough time. After a life built entirely around the controlled application of force, Honda Tadakatsu was brought down by age and stillness, which may have been the only 2 enemies he was never trained to fight. Miyamoto Musashi. Miyamoto Musashi fought his most famous duel on April 13th, 1612, on a small island called Ganryujima in the strait between Honshu and Kyushu against the swordsman Sasaki Kojiro, who was considered his equal or superior by many observers at the time. Musashi arrived late, deliberately according to most accounts, having spent the boat ride to the island carving a replacement sword from one of the vessel's spare oars. Kojiro was waiting on the beach, furious at the delay, and the duel itself lasted only a moment. Musashi's wooden sword caught Kojiro at the temple and incapacitated him fatally. Kojiro's steel blade, longer than a standard sword, missed. According to tradition, Musashi then returned to the boat without looking back. He was approximately 28 years old. He spent the next 3 decades fighting, winning, studying, painting, and writing, engaging in what he claimed were over 60 duels across Japan, and besting every opponent, then slowly transitioning into a philosopher swordsman, whose later works on strategy, aesthetics, and the nature of martial discipline were as carefully constructed as anything he produced in combat. He passed away on June 13th, 1645, in Reigando Cave in Kumamoto Prefecture, where he had spent his final years in voluntary austerity. The Book of 5 Rings was completed approximately 2 weeks before his passing. His final philosophical text, the Dakido, 21 Precepts for Living, was written on May 12th, 1645, roughly a month before he passed, and contains lines like, "Do not seek pleasure for its own sake, and do not regret what you have done," which read differently, when you know he wrote them while dying? The likely cause was thoracic cancer, based on a modern retrospective reading of the symptoms he described in his own writings. Difficulty swallowing, pain, progressive weakness. He passed sitting upright in a formal position with his two swords placed beside him, having arranged his passing as carefully as he had arranged every duel that preceded it. Sanada Yukimura. Sanada Yukimura was called a hero who may appear once in 100 years by Tokugawa sources, which is a remarkable thing to have written about you by the people who were trying to bring you down. He and his father Masayuki had already demonstrated at the Second Battle of Ueda in 1600 that the Sanada could hold a fortress against overwhelming numbers. With approximately 2,000 men, they delayed a Tokugawa force of 38,000 for 12 days, forcing Tokugawa Hidetada to arrive at Sekigahara after the battle had already ended, which contributed to his father's humiliation and the Sanada's subsequent punishment with exile. In the spring of 1615, knowing the siege of Osaka was a losing campaign, knowing the Toyotomi cause had no realistic path to victory against the full Tokugawa military machine, Yukimura fought anyway, at the Battle of Tennoji on June 3, 1615. In what became the decisive engagement of the summer campaign of Osaka. He led a charge that broke through Tokugawa defensive lines and drove toward Ieyasu's own command post. Several sources, varying in their reliability, claim that Ieyasu's guard was overwhelmed enough in those moments that Ieyasu himself prepared to take his own life, believing the battle lost. Whether or not that is precisely true, the Tokugawa forces remembered the charge as the most dangerous moment of the day. Yukimura's unit was eventually destroyed around him. He retreated, exhausted and alone, to a shrine and sat down to rest. A Tokugawa soldier named Nishio Nizaemon found him there. According to tradition, Yukimura offered the man some tobacco, told him to take his head, and sat still. He was approximately 49 years old. He passed in the last significant battle fought by samurai forces against Tokugawa authority, having come closer than anyone else to making it mean something. Ai Naomasa. Naomasa commanded the most visually distinctive unit in Tokugawa service, every soldier in his formation outfitted in red lacquered armor, a choice so deliberate it functioned as psychological warfare before the first sword was drawn. The sight of an entire unit in blood red advancing across a gray battlefield was designed to unsettle, and by most contemporary accounts, it worked. Naomasa was one of Tokugawa Ieyasu's four heavenly kings, and arguably the most aggressive of the four, always pressing forward, always among the first into an engagement. At the Battle of Sekigahara on October 21, 1600, arguably the most consequential single battle in Japanese history, he was struck by a musket ball during the fighting. The wound was serious, hitting the left arm and, according to some sources, part of the shoulder, but not immediately fatal, and Sekigahara was a Tokugawa victory, the decisive one that determined the political future of Japan. Naomasa survived the battle and was treated, but the wound never properly healed. He passed away on March 24, 1602, 18 months after Sekigahara, the injury having progressively deteriorated his health in ways that contemporary medicine could not address. He was approximately 41 years old. His passing is a reminder of something the aesthetics of samurai culture tend to obscure. The era of firearms changed the nature of wounds. A sword cut either ends things quickly or can sometimes be managed. A musket ball that lodges in the body, that cannot be fully removed, that affects the surrounding tissue over months. That is a different kind of passing, a slow erosion of the man who stood in red armor at Sekigahara and helped decide the future of Japan. He passed away in a room, not on a battlefield, 18 months after the war was won, which is not the end the red armor was built for. Tsukahara Bakuden. Tsukahara Bakuden is almost an anomaly in this list because his story is not fundamentally about how he passed. It is about the extraordinary fact that he survived everything long enough to pass naturally at all. He reportedly fought 37 duels without a single defeat and overcame over 200 enemies in battlefield engagements, numbers that come from Japanese traditional sources and cannot be independently verified but are consistent across multiple accounts. He trained 3 Ashikaga shoguns in swordsmanship, which speaks to a reputation that extended well beyond the warrior class, and he conducted 3 separate warrior pilgrimages across Japan, Musha Shugyo, seeking out any swordsman worth challenging. His most famous story involves a braggart on a boat who challenged him. Bokuden agreed to a duel, suggested they fight on a small island visible from the boat, steered toward it, then stepped ashore as they arrived, while the braggart was still removing his sandals, and pushed the boat back into the current, stranding his challenger on the island, shouting back that this was his no sword school in action. Whether exactly true or not, the story captures something real about his philosophy, which was that the best outcome of any confrontation was the one where you didn't have to bleed at all. He survived the entire murderous chaos of the early to mid Sengoku period, outlived nearly every dangerous person he ever encountered, and passed away in 1571 at approximately 82 years old of natural causes in bed. 82 years old in 16th century Japan after a life of sustained conflict is not just longevity. It is a statistical event that borders on the absurd. He was not brought down by anyone. Nothing caught him. He simply ran out of time, which was the only opponent that ever managed it. Okita Soji. Okita Soji was probably the finest swordsman the Shinsengumi ever produced, which is saying something given that the Shinsengumi was assembled specifically by selecting from the best swordsmen in Japan. He was the captain of the first unit, responsible for some of the organization's most demanding close-quarters work, and he fought in the Ikadaya incident on July 8, 1864. The raid on an anti-shogunate meeting in Kyoto that became the Shinsengumi's most famous single engagement. According to some accounts, Okita collapsed mid-battle at Ikadaya from a pulmonary hemorrhage, coughing blood. Other accounts dispute this or describe it differently. What is not disputed is that he had tuberculosis, a diagnosis that progressively stripped away the physical capacity of a man whose entire existence was built on physical precision. While the Shinsengumi fought its increasingly desperate rearguard campaign against the imperialist forces through 1867 and into 1868, Okita was confined to a doctor's house in Edo, his lungs failing, unable to participate in the battles his unit was losing. He passed away on July 19, 1868. The same year the Meiji Restoration transferred political power from the shogunate, the Shinsengumi had given everything to preserve. The Tokugawa era ended. The samurai era as a political reality ended with it. Okita was somewhere between 24 and 26 years old, depending on which of the disputed birth year accounts you accept. He never saw the new Japan. He passed away in a borrowed room in a city being renamed, having spent his brief adulthood defending an order that ceased to exist in the same season he did, the last of an era, fading quietly while history finished without him. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.